Hello, this is Marc from My Keys to Music. Thanks for joining me on this video. Today we're taking a look at the Nord Stage 3 and making a helicopter sound. Now, why would I make a helicopter sound? Well, to be honest with you, when I was when I was in the 6th grade, I saw my first synthesizer. It was the Korg Poly 6, and I was so impressed because one of the things they did early on in that demonstration was to make a helicopter sound, and I thought, how cool is it to have a helicopter coming out of a keyboard? I just thought that was just so amazing. So I figured, hey, no synth is complete without knowing how to make a helicopter sound. And of course, that applies to our Stage 3 synth as well. So for those of you interested on this journey, join me and we will figure this out together. So this is the third of the Discovery Series videos. The first one we talked about the THX sound. The second one we did was the Baba O'Reilly imitation or emulation. And on this channel, we're talking about different things like the Nord Electro 5, the Nord Electro 6, the Stage 3, and new to the list, which you haven't seen much of, but I've created one video already, is the Korg Minilog XD, which is a nice little polyphonic analog synthesizer here, which I'm excited to talk about as we move along here on the channel. All right, but today we're talking about helicopters, so let's listen to what this sounds like. This sound comes to us from Marc Stallings. Marc Stallings, as you know, was the creator, or the inventor, I should say, of that THX sound emulation that we had on our first Discovery Series. And that was just a terrific sound. And Marc is a sound designer / engineer. And you can be located here. I put his email address below the description of this video. So reach out to him if you want more help or some advice, or if you want the sounds directly, he can probably send them to you. And basically, he can be hired to help you with your sound. Okay, let's listen to the helicopter. There we go. Sounds like a helicopter to me. Now, we can adjust the speed using the LFO rate here. And if you're really smooth with your hand, you can speed it up and slow it down. All right, so let's build this from scratch so we can learn how this was accomplished. And unlike the way we did the THX sound, which is basically I looked under each knob and showed you what each parameter was set to, I never really explained why or how it all came to be. So I thought we would do that. I got a suggestion from another subscriber that said, why don't you break it down a little differently so we can learn a little bit more about how this works. So I'll do that. I'll hold the shift button and the sound initialization button to clear the decks. Now it still says helicopter here for the program area, but trust me, it's blank and no more helicopter because I've just cleared the decks. Now I also have some effect settings here set. Marc has his digital delay and the EQ, but we'll play with those here in a minute. Okay, so let's take a look at how we set this up. Well, if you remember what a helicopter sounds like, it's not tones. It's not any kind of sound wave or any kind of tone or note. It's actually just white noise. So we actually have the ability to create white noise here on the Nord Stage 3. And we can do that by introducing Oscillator 2. That's where the white noise hangs out. So we have to turn that on. In order to do that, I have to hold the shift button and move this Oscillator 2 until it gets to the point where we have noise. And noise 1 is the one that makes the most sense for this helicopter. There's actually two different noise options here for the Stage 3, noise 2 and noise 1. But we're going to use noise 1 because that's, like I said, it sounds the best for helicopters. Now, if I just play that, there's no noise. It's because I have to introduce the noise here by turning the oscillator control up and mixing that noise in. So listen to this. We just want pure noise. Now, it still doesn't sound like a helicopter, and that's because all the frequencies are being let through, and we're not using the same filter Marc was using as well. So to do that, I'm going to adjust the frequency cutoff here and bring it down quite a bit, maybe to a 2 or 3. Now, that is so low that you really can't even hear much going on. But remember, we're going to make motion for this to represent the rotors, the blades. So in order to make motion, if you recall from any of my trainings on the YouTube channel here, or if you've taken the Master the Nord Stage 3 course, the official course on My Keys to Music, then you'll know all about the LFO and how to invoke it and what it does. In this case, we want to invoke the LFO to make motion on the frequency cutoff. The frequency cutoff is the ability to let those frequencies come in or not. So let's turn on the LFO. Now, how do you turn on the LFO? There's a couple ways to do that, but in this case, we want to turn the LFO over here where the frequency cutoff is. So we want the LFO to have influence just on this over here. So this is the knob we want to use for that. So let's listen to that. Now, you still don't really hear the motion, and the reason you don't really hear much of the motion is because the rate's too slow. So I'll have to adjust the LFO rate here. Just like that. You can see here it indicates the rate in the form of hertz. So Marc had his around a 9.5, which is decent. Now that is really the fundamentals right there. That is the basics of a helicopter. Now what else can we do to enhance this? Well, we have some options here to add some effects. So let's throw some EQ on there. Marc had put some EQ, so let's invoke that here with the synth option for EQ. And he took the treble from a 0 down to about a negative 15 dB. Somewhere, or maybe it was less than that. Maybe it was a negative 10, something like that. The mid he left alone, and the bass he went from, he basically has a plus 15 dB on the bass. Okay, so that's some basic EQ there. But he also has a very interesting digital delay happening here as well. So I'll turn on the digital delay for the synth part, and he has it in analog mode as well as the dry wet maybe at a 2 or 3 and 0 feedback. And listen to that sound without the delay and now with the delay. It adds a whole effect of the rotor sound or the blades reflecting off each other. You can hear just a delay. So it's sort of the spinning. He also introduced a ping pong that will give you the effect in both the left and right. All right, so there's that. Now, the other thing he had done, which I neglected to mention here early on, was the filter is not at LP12. He has it on a low pass M, which is the low pass Moog filter. There, that's even more growlier and deeper and richer. Now, you can play with the frequency here, and you can play with the LFO amount. So a combination of the LFO amount, the frequency, and the rate, and those in combination are going to give you the helicopter. And then you can leave your delay on there and your amp EQ just as it was. Now, I think another enhancement to this that I particularly like better is when you are talking about the rate, you'll notice that I barely touch this knob here, and the rate really, it has a strong increment. So to get around that issue, you can hold the shift button and make the rate tied to the master clock for the LFO. And for good measure, do the same for the digital delay. You can also sync that to the master clock. Now do that here by holding the shift button and turning this. So now it's got the master clock button or the light on there for the master clock. And now that those are synced to the master clock, the rate for the LFO is not necessarily tempo, it's increment. So now I'll put this to a 1/8 triplet increment because you need it just fast enough so that when the master clock is moving the rate up and down, the increment is just so that you get the proper speed for the helicopter. So now finally to adjust the rate of the helicopter, because let's say we want to start with a slow wind up of those blades, I can push and hold the master clock button. That exposes the rate. I can bring the rate down to, let's say, a 30, let's say a 50. And now we'll have a very slow rate. And I'll bring it up ever so slightly. Very easily, my hand can move this in such a way that it's like the blades are spinning up. And the LFO rate, of course, is being driven from the master clock. So if I get out of the master clock and then play with the rate here again, you can see I can go from a 1/8 triplet to, let's say, a 1/16. Now that's a little too fast, and you can push and hold the master clock button again, and then bring that rate down a little bit. And you can play around with it like that. So I think that pretty much covers the basics of a helicopter for the Nord Stage 3. I mean, it's not an exact replica of a helicopter, but it's pretty darn close, and it's how most synths would replicate a helicopter. They would use the LFO, the frequency cutoff, and white noise in combination to create that effect. The other thing to pay special attention to is that you want your wave form for the LFO, the way the LFO is driven over time, to be just so. You want the triangle seems to make the most sense. If you use the other waveforms, they don't quite get the job done. But you can experiment with that on your own. So thanks for joining me on this lesson and the third installment of the Discovery series for the Nord Stage 3. If you like what you see here and you want more of it, feel free to subscribe. If you are just brand new to the Nord line of keyboards, like I said, take a look at the description down below and you can find out all kinds of information. Visit My Keys to Music if you want some formal training. And I guess we'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching. Really appreciate the support. We'll catch you soon. Thanks.